Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. In a city once known for quiet, snow-covered streets and an unassuming Midwestern calm, Minneapolis now stands at the center of a national crisis, and a crisis born federal enforcement, public outrage, and protest.
Across the city, political tension is as thick as the winter air. Federal agents, once hidden in the background, now dominate headlines. Their actions have sparked protests, legal battles, and an extraordinary reshuffling of leadership within the nation's immigration enforcement apparatus. Tonight, we begin a journey deep into this moment, weaving together the events that brought Minneapolis to the brink, the decisions made behind closed doors, and the rising conflict between authority and community. For months, federal immigration agents had been operating in Minneapolis as part of a broader enforcement campaign. Thousands of officers, including Border Patrol units, had been deployed under what was described as an ambitious crackdown on illegal crossings and criminal activity. To many residents, it initially seemed like a routine expansion of federal law enforcement, organized, precise, and discreet. But that impression changed irrevocably on a cold January morning. On a routine deployment, Federal Border Patrol agents encountered a 37-year-old ICU nurse named Alex Pretti. What began as an attempt to detain or question him escalated in ways no one expected. Though official accounts initially claimed Pretti was armed and posed a threat, video footage released by bystanders told a different story, a man complying, holding only his phone and trying to document the scene when an agent opened fire. The city was shaken. Protests erupted. Anger grew. And for many Minneapolis residents, the death of Pretti became a symbol, not of isolated violence, but of a larger pattern of federal overreach. At the center of this unfolding storm was Gregory Bovino, a senior Border Patrol official whose face had become familiar to national audiences. Bovino had been leading the deployment of federal agents in Minneapolis and other cities, unapologetically advocating for aggressive enforcement measures. But as the fallout from Pretti's death intensified, so did criticism of Bovino's public statements. Civil rights advocates, local leaders, and even some lawmakers questioned his characterization of the events, especially after video evidence contradicted official claims. Pressure mounted from multiple directions. Demonstrators rallied in the streets night after night, demanding accountability.
The city of Minneapolis is filing legal challenges against the federal forces. Their actions represent a clear constitutional overreach that we cannot ignore.
Members of Congress, from both parties, weighed in on the legality and ethics of the federal operation. The narrative that once seemed controlled began to slip. What was intended as a demonstration of federal resolve now looked like a miscalculation. Then, in a development few expected, the Trump administration signaled a major shift. Officials confirmed that Bovino, long considered the public face of the enforcement surge, would soon be departing Minneapolis, along with some of the agents under his command. A senior administration source indicated that his removal was not simply routine redeployment, but part of a broader recalibration in response to sustained protest and legal scrutiny. For many residents watching from the cold streets, this was more than personnel news. It was an acknowledgement, however small, that the federal government was listening. Shortly after Bovino's departure was announced, President Donald Trump made another significant move. He dispatched Tom Homan, his appointed Border Czar, to Minnesota to oversee immigration enforcement operations and provide direct oversight. From the White House, Tom Homan is not a figure unknown to national audiences. A veteran of federal immigration enforcement, his career spans decades and controversy. He previously served as acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and has been both praised and criticized for aggressive border strategies. The administration described Homan's arrival as a step toward stabilizing the situation and enhancing cooperation with state and local authorities, even as it maintained that enforcement actions would continue. But the narrative the city was now witnessing was far from simple. It was not just about policy or leadership. It was about perception. Minneapolis residents and political leaders saw Homan as a symbol of federal insistence, of unyielding enforcement priorities, and of a government doubling down rather than stepping back. Across Minneapolis, the response was immediate and visceral. Demonstrations, once focused primarily on justice for Alex Pretti, grew into broader expressions of frustration, not just with a single shooting but with what many saw as a pattern of federal disregard for local voices. Community leaders called for transparency. Civil liberties advocates demanded independent investigations. Local residents documented protests, encounters with law enforcement, and moments of tension that reflected deeper divides. Legal challenges emerged as well. Minneapolis and Minnesota officials argued that elements of the federal deployment violated state authority and constitutional protections. Judges were asked to weigh in on these claims, adding another layer of scrutiny to an already volatile situation. For many Minnesotans, the stakes were personal, not theoretical. They weren't watching a distant political debate. They were living it. Inside makeshift federal command centers, agents prepared for Homan's arrival. Tactical briefs were updated. Intelligence reports circulated. Field teams coordinated movement plans that reflected the complexity of operating in an environment no longer defined by cooperation, but by confrontation. Sources familiar with the transition said that Homan's role would not only centralize decision-making, but also aim to reframe the narrative, both internally among agents and externally in media and public messaging. This was an effort to steady a public-facing front in the midst of a crisis. Yet for every attempt to stabilize the scene, there seemed to be an equal and opposite reaction from the streets. Protests intensified, and public outrage did not subside. While political maneuvering and leadership reshuffles dominated the headlines, the human dimension of this crisis was unfolding in quiet, powerful ways. Family members of those affected, particularly the relatives of Alex Pretti, spoke to reporters, community groups, and activists about loss, grief, and the need for truth and accountability. From vigils to public statements, they reminded the city that beyond policies and enforcement tactics were real lives forever altered. Meanwhile, residents on both sides of the debate described an atmosphere of anxiety. For some, the federal presence signified protection and order. For others, it felt like an occupation, a demonstration of power that overlooked local norms and values. Stories circulated of families avoiding certain areas, of neighbors organizing community safety watch groups, and of local leaders struggling to balance public safety with public outrage. In every narrative, one question lingered. What does justice look like in a democracy when enforcement and civil liberties collide? Night has fallen on Minneapolis, bringing a quiet but not a calm. After days of protest, the city holds its breath. Federal officer Tom Homan oversees a tense peace, while city leaders try to navigate a path forward that respects everyone's rights. For some, this is a time of personal grief. Families are remembering loved ones like Alex Pretti, a face to the human cost of these events. Activists are planning their next moves, and residents are just wondering what tomorrow will bring. With the departure of officials like Gregory Bovino, a new chapter has begun. This isn't just about names. It's about trust, accountability, and the delicate balance of power. Minneapolis has become a mirror for the nation, asking a tough question: how do we maintain order while protecting our rights? The coming days will be a test for this city and for the country. Thanks for watching.